Rear Admiral Sir Francis Beaufort recalls his entire life whilst drowning. Rear Admiral Sir Francis Beaufort, KCB, FRS, FRGS, FRAS, MRIA, 27th of May 1774 to 17th of December 1857, was an Irish explorer, hydrographer and officer in the Royal Navy who dedicated his entire life to mapping the coasts and seas of our planet. His aim was to improve the safety of those who travel by sea and to improve our knowledge of the tides, winds and magnetism of our planet. As a council member of the Royal Society, the Royal Observatory and the Royal Geographic Society, which he helped found, Beaufort also used his position and prestige later in life to act for many scientists of his time. For example, Beaufort obtained government support for the Antarctic voyage of 1839 to 1843 by James Clark Ross for extensive measurements of terrestrial magnetism, coordinated with similar measurements in Europe and Asia. And as a Fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, Beaufort gave enthusiastic support to his friend Sir George Airy, the Astronomer Royal, in achieving a historic period of measurements by the Greenwich and Good Hope observatories. So, a man whose life was dedicated to science in its best sense, discovery that benefits his fellow man and saves lives. The Beaufort Scale. Beaufort was the creator of the Beaufort Scale for indicating wind force, and we have a guest video that explains what the Beaufort Scale is. Beaufort also promoted the development of reliable tide tables around British shores, inspiring similar research for Europe and North America. With his friend William of Whewell, he gained the support of the Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington, in expanding record-keeping at 200 British Coast Guard stations. Hydrography. In 1829 he was appointed British Admiralty hydrographer to the Navy. Hydrography is the science of surveying and charting bodies of water, such as seas, lakes and rivers. During the 26 years through which he held that post, he rendered his name almost a synonym in the Navy for hydrography and nautical science. Beaufort had his name given to many geographical places, including the Beaufort Sea, an arm of the Arctic Ocean, and Beaufort Island, Antarctica. He was also a meticulous observer and recorder of antiquity. Caramania was a description of the south coast of Asia Minor, and of the remains of antiquity, with plans, views, etc. collected during a survey of that coast. Background to the experience. Beaufort was descended from French Protestant Huguenots who fled the French wars of religion in the 16th century. His father, the Reverend Daniel Augustus Beaufort, was rector of Navan, County Meath, which has many prehistoric monuments, including Newgrange. Francis grew up in Ireland until at age 14 he went to sea. Beginning on a merchant ship of the British East India Company, Beaufort rose to midshipman, then lieutenant on the 10th of May 1796 and commander on the 13th of November 1800, aged just 26. In 1800 he was wounded, receiving 19 wounds in the head, arms and body, 3 sword cuts and 16 musket shots. But Beaufort returned to active service in the Royal Navy. The Admiralty gave Beaufort his first ship command, HMS Woolwich, in 1805, and he had just turned 30 years old. And crucial to our observation, Beaufort never learnt to swim. This is a lifeline used to rescue people from sinking ships. The experience was documented in a letter Admiral, then Captain Beaufort, sent to Dr. William Wollaston, and its contents were recorded in the autobiography of Sir John Barrow. We have included a short biography of Sir John Barrow in the description. The same description then got repeated in Haddock's Somnambulism and Psychism, and repeated yet again in full in From Mind to Spirit by Sophia Elizabeth de Morgan. Thus, although included in subsequent books by psychic researchers, the original was a simple letter from a man to his friend. The letter. Many years ago, when I was a youngster, on board one of His Majesty's ships in Portsmouth Harbour, after sculling about in a very small boat, I was endeavouring to fasten her alongside the ship to one of the scuttlings. In a foolish eagerness, I stepped upon the gunwale. The boat, of course, upset, and I fell into the water, and not knowing how to swim, all my efforts to lay hold either of the boat or the floating sculls were fruitless. The transaction had not been observed by the sentinel on the gangway, and therefore it was not till the tide had drifted me some distance astern of the ship that a man in the foretop saw me splashing in the water and gave the alarm. The first lieutenant instantly and gallantly jumped overboard. The carpenter followed his example, and the gunner hastened into a boat and pulled after them. With the violent but vain attempts to make myself heard, I had swallowed much water. I was soon exhausted by my struggles, and before any relief reached me, I had sunk below the surface. All hope had fled, all exertion ceased, and I felt that I was drowning. So far, these facts were either partially remembered after my recovery, or supplied by those who had latterly witnessed the scene. For during an interval of such agitation, a drowning person is too much occupied in catching at every passing straw, or too much absorbed by alternate hope and despair, to mark the succession of events very accurately. Not so, however, with the fact which immediately ensued. My mind had then undergone the sudden revolution which appeared to you so remarkable, and all the circumstances of which are now as vividly fresh in my memory as if they had occurred but yesterday. From the moment that all exertion had ceased, which I imagine was the immediate consequence of complete suffocation, a calm feeling of the most perfect tranquillity succeeded the most tumultuous sensation. It might be called apathy, certainly not resignation, for drowning no longer appeared an evil. I no longer thought of being rescued, nor was I in any bodily pain. On the contrary, my sensations were now of rather a pleasurable cast, partaking of that dull but contented sort of feeling which precedes the sleep produced by fatigue. Though the senses were thus deadened, not so the mind. Its activity seemed to be invigorated in a ratio which defies all description, for thought rose after thought with a rapidity of succession that is not only indescribable, but probably inconceivable by anyone who has not been himself in a similar situation. The course of these thoughts I can even now in a great measure retrace. The event that had just taken place, the awkwardness which produced it, the bustle it must have occasioned, for I had observed 2 persons jump from the chains, the effect it would have on a most affectionate father, the manner in which he would disclose it to the rest of the family, and 1,000 other circumstances minutely associated with home were the first series of reflections that occurred. They took, then, a wider range, a last cruise, a former voyage and shipwreck, my school, the progress I had made there, the time I had misspent, and even all my boyish pursuits and adventures. Thus, travelling backwards, every incident of my past life seemed to me to glance across my recollection in retrograde procession, not, however, in mere outline, as here stated, but the picture filled up with every minute and collateral feature. In short, the whole period of my existence seemed to be placed before me in a kind of panoramic review, and each act of it seemed to be accompanied by a consciousness of right or wrong, or by some reflection on its cause or consequences. Indeed, many trifling events, which had been long forgotten, then crowded into my imagination, and with the character of recent familiarity. May not all this be some indication of the almost infinite power of memory with which we may awaken in another world and be compelled to contemplate our past lives? Or might it not in some degree warrant the inference that death is only a change or modification of our existence in which there is no real pause or interruption? But, however that may be, one circumstance was highly remarkable, that the innumerable ideas which floated into my mind were all retrospective. Yet I had been religiously brought up. My hopes and fears of the next world had lost nothing of their early strength, and at any other period intense interest and awful anxiety would have been excited by the mere idea that I was floating on the threshold of eternity. Yet at that inexplicable moment, when I had a full consciousness that I had already crossed that threshold, not a single thought wandered into the future. I was wrapped entirely in the past. The length of time that was occupied by this deluge of ideas, or rather the shortness of time into which they were condensed, I cannot now state with precision. Yet, certainly, 2 minutes could not have elapsed from the moment of suffocation to the time of my being hauled up. The final chapter. Beaufort retired from the Royal Navy with the rank of Rear Admiral on 1st of October 1846 at the age of 72. He became Sir Francis Beaufort on being appointed KCB, the Knight Commander of the Bath, on the 29th of April 1848. A relatively belated honorific, considering the eminence of his position from 1829 onward. He died on 17th of December 1857 at age 83 in Hove, Sussex, England. He is buried in the church gardens of St John at Hackney, London, where his tomb may still be seen. His home in London, number 51 Manchester Street, Westminster, is marked by an historic blue plaque noting his residency and achievements.
Went behind it, didn't it?